but one of the most extraordinary careers as a writer and a creator of anybody working today. You know, you should read his books. When I was writing a memoir about my father, I read Frank's memoir called Ghostlight about growing up, and it was sort of a template for me. I mean, it's just an absolutely beautiful book.
Oh,
and he wrote another book about George Bush that I've kind of come to agree with more than I did when I was working for Bush. And he show that hopefully we can get him to talk about. Joe Trippi, legendary consultant, who's going to explain to us what's really going to happen. And Rick Wilson, who I have to say, working with Rick has been the great pleasure of my career at making ads. So Frank, let's start with you. You were just in London. Is everybody over there looking at the world and thinking it's falling apart here?
Yes, I mean, so much so that when we were flying back over the weekend, a middle-aged guy who was the equivalent of like a TSA employee on the British side at Heathrow Airport, getting us through security, said, "Oh, you're going home? Where's home?" I said, "New York." He said, "Good luck." I felt he was speaking about America as a whole. So
I can't.
Everyone's. I mean, Kirk Starmer has his own problems, but everyone's pretty obsessed with the American election.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Can others hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can hear you. We got you.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it is something. I gave a speech in Canada last week. I was up there for one day, and people were a little like, "Are you okay?" on the way back. It was just a little. Yeah, there's. I think there's a global sense of concern and fear and worry about where this country goes in the future. It's something that in an ordinary world we wouldn't have that fear in our lives, but now it's part of it. It's like everything's on the line.
I had an epiphany about this a couple of days ago, where I was, why are they so confident, and people who are pro democracy are so in a state of terror about every poll and everything, and it hit me that they're in a win-win. That if they win, they get their way. They take the country where they want to go. They run roughshod over democracy and the rest of us. And if they lose, they know that we'll play by the rules and let them have another shot at it 4 years from now. That we'll keep democracy safe for them to try to make another run at it. And we all know that if they win, we'll never get another shot at it. And so that's why we hang on every poll. That's why any indication that we might lose it all freaks all of us out, is because we know if we lose this, we lose it forever. And they know if they lose it, that we will preserve democracy for them to take one more shot, another, or two more shots, whatever it takes, which is what they've been doing for 30, 40 years. But that's just my.
No, it's so true. Also, another thing in the case of being abroad in London, Viktor Orban, what's going on in France, what's going on in Italy, all of that is much more real to them. Here, when Trump says he admires Orban, most people don't know who the hell he's talking about, or what it means, or what the implications are. They don't think his fans don't even seem to really get who Putin is, but that's another story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Joe's point and the like the immediacy of this in the States. People are aware of this around the globe, but the immediacy of the States here in the States is very much acute. It feels very direct and very intense in ways that in no other election of our lifetime, including 2020, frankly, for me at least, was it that level of you didn't have that level of an understanding of just how deadly the consequences could be.
You know, Frank, let me ask you. You wrote an extraordinary article on Roy Cohn for the New York Times Magazine.
Terrific piece.
Thank you.
I would encourage everybody, if you haven't read it, go and Google it and read it.
Thank you.
And I think it was amazingly, depressingly prescient over what has happened. But can you speak to that and how you see Cohn as a figure in our?
Well, in that piece, the best I've been a couple of years, the point I was trying to make was the official version of Cohn had always been he went down with Joe McCarthy. He was sort
Right.
of forgotten about, went into oblivion. Yes, he was Trump's lawyer, but that wasn't considered a major part of his career. But in fact, he thrived in New York well after McCarthy, and was actually to some extent, had encounters with people like the Clintons and Chuck Schumer and all sorts of people who loved a favors network and
Mm-hmm.
loved power and money and felt he could help them. And so, whether it be people in show business or politics or journalism, including the New York Times. So, he had a back channel conversation going on with Abe Rosenthal, who was the executive editor of the Times when I first arrived there in the 1980s, before he died of AIDS, before Cohn died of AIDS. And that continues to this day. You see, Cohn's gone, but that whole ethos remains. And so you see people who should, Steve Schwartzman,
Sure.
Bill Ackman, rich people, some people in Hollywood for sure, who are willing to tolerate a Trump or toady to him the same way they would have to Roy Cohn, because it's all transactional, and he can do good. I mean, the Clintons, as I recall, I hope I'm not misremembering my own piece, were at the Melania Trump wedding,
They were.
In
Yep.
Florida. And so, and I'm not picking on the Clintons, so were plenty of Republicans and other Democrats. But this is the way the world works, and Trump is so awful. You'd think by their standards, let alone our standards, but they're willing to give to him to get, and it's just craven behavior, and it's something that is built into the system, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, do you think one of the themes of your writing has been the death of truth? I mean, your book on Bush was, I think, beautifully constructed that way.
Thank you.
Do you say we live in a Harris wins world? Say we live in a world in which he actually gets inaugurated, and that, I think we are very concerned about the period from election night to January 20th. But but looking ahead, trying to see what that would be like, do you think that this will be able to be a comeback for truth? That we can live in a world where we can argue about things, but at least we're agreed upon
Facts.
Yeah, or some semblance of it.
I'm pessimistic. I mean, I think it will take time to bring it back. It's a cultural shift. But you look at Trump today. Just
Right.
and granted, he's the most egregious example, but he called what everyone saw with their own eyes on television at Madison Square Garden a love fest. He really felt uh, reality can be bent that much that you can't even, your eyes are lying to you,
Yeah.
and I can now here's the most vulgar and powerful example of this, but he has acolytes like Elon Musk who will enforce this in mass media, and not just Musk, I fear. And so it's going to take some sort of cultural revolution, not in the Maoist sense, but
Yeah.
I hope. But
Let's, yeah.
Yeah, because if it does, Frank, let me tell you, you're going to be one of the first to go. Let me just tell you that.
I
mean,
know, I know.
you know,
Going to
New
be
York
first up against
Times,
the wall, Frank.
HBO. Yeah, really, brother.
Yeah,
They come
but
for us. We're going to say, well, what about Frank? So,
yeah, no, I get it, and I'm willing to to go to the barricades with you guys, but um, I do think the culture, what's happening in mass media, the rise of not just social media like Twitter, but TikTok as a news force and all that, that what's we're seeing happening at papers like the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times,
right.
even as we speak, it's all up for grabs,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and and I don't know the answer. What do you guys think? I mean, I think it's not something that's going to change overnight if we have a sane government replacing in lieu of if Harris, let's say if Harris wins, it's an effective government, uh, probably centrist government in this kind of Biden mold. That's what I'm expecting if
Yep.
she wins. Is that really going to change the culture where people literally people don't? There's a mass shooting and people can be convinced in this country that it was staged. That's how bad it's gotten.
Yeah. Rick, you're
Yeah,
going to have to run early. So can you weigh in on that? Yeah.
yeah. Truth. The problem of truth right now, I think, is the devaluation of it. Trump was uniquely positioned to devalue it in the minds of, unfortunately, about 70 million Americans, and so now, in part, they look at lies in politics, for not just from Trump, but from other people on their side of an issue, um, as owning the libs, or as some sort of marker of their tribe, and I find that particularly disturbing.
Yeah. I, I don't know how we get back. But let me ask you this, Frank. If you were, it's probably an unfair question, but if you were a reporter at the Washington Post today, what would be your reaction to what the Post just did?
I'd be very upset, and it's easy to say. I actually quit a newspaper early in my career over involving in some ways a parallel cast of characters. I was one of my first newspaper job in New York as a kid was at the New York Post when Dorothy Schiff owned it. Murdoch, then unknown, bought it. Uh, and
Right.
everyone said, "Oh, it's great. Dorothy Schiff was so cheap, and he'll spend money." I was a movie critic, and I was called in the first week with other critics and told by a new editor, "By the way, from now on, we'll consider the views of our advertisers when we review movies."
Lord.
And I was a kid. I was in my 20s. I didn't have a child yet. I quit. It's easy to say that now, but it's a different world. And also
Right.
the stake, and also the stakes are much higher. If you the worry about the endorsement issue is kind of a Trojan horse or a red herring. Newspaper endorsements don't matter much, and really rarely have, particularly at the national level. The issue is that it clearly indicated that Bezos and the Murdoch schooled publisher that he hired are willing to bend
Mhm.
in much the way we're talking about vis-a-vis Roy Cohn. And so the question becomes, as a reporter, forget about movie reviews. What if we have to cover Amazon or this other many other interests of our owner or of his political friends, whoever they may be, uh, to suit him. There's no way of knowing that. Of course, Bezos is denying that would ever happen, but the issue has now been raised. On the
Yeah.
other hand, if you're there are many brilliant reporters at the Post, and even
Sure.
this week they've been doing incredible work,
Hmm.
including about Elon Musk and Twitter.
Guys,
Um,
I have to hop off.
Okay,
Be
Rick.
back
Thanks,
Good
man.
tomorrow.
luck.
Thanks, Rick.
Hey, Frank.
And, um, uh, where are they going to go if they quit? There's
Yeah.
basically there's no other jobs. I could
Substack.
quit and end up at Time Magazine. There's not even a Time Magazine in that sense
Yeah.
anymore. Um, and uh, so they have real lives. They are speaking up, many of them. Um, if I were on the editorial board, I can understand resigning because first of all, they can often stay at the paper and ours. I understand it,
Right.
but that's because that the editorial board is basically worthless. If you can't, if the Bezos could have interfered with editorial, which is what an endorsement is, he's broken that. That's gone. But reporters, they'll have to see what happens and see if they feel their stuff is being tampered with and they're being told not to report on certain things or not to be aggressive on certain things. And the specter has now been raised, and I feel terrible for the people who were there, and they're losing a lot of readers who are pissed off. So you understand why
So
they're canceling.
let me ask you that. So what do you, if you're a subscriber to the Washington Post, what's your view on canceling or not?
And it's funny. I've been weighing it since I've been back
Yeah,
home. I'm a native of Washington. I was a newspaper delivery boy as a kid.
right.
I grew up in the city. I'm at ridiculously and practically, I actually even get the Washington Post home delivered in New York. I must be one of three people who do it. And I'm feeling a little bit conflicted. I feel a little bit soiled about giving money to Jeff Bezos. Quite honestly, it's not a reflection of what I feel about the journalism of the Post so far, this endorsement issue aside. Um, but and I've been concerned even before this. I was concerned when it seemed quite obvious to me that Will Lewis, this Murdoch guy that Bezos put into the
Right.
Post, was
It's
trying
always the
to,
Brits.
yeah, trying to affect the news coverage of his own involvement,
Yes.
possibly alleged involvement with covering up the hacking
Yeah.
scandal in the Murdoch empire. So that's already made me suspect, and I have that anti-Murdoch feelings in my blood. So I haven't made a decision. I guess I'm being a wimp on this. I'm going to see what happens and then decide after the election, I guess.
Yeah. Joe, how do you come down on that? Do you think?
I'm torn too. I mean, on one hand, all of us canceling our subscriptions isn't going to bother Bezos and hit him at all. But if it leads to uh, cutting payroll for the reporters that are in there still trying to do their jobs, I mean, that's what kind of makes me conflicted about the idea of ending my subscription there. Otherwise, if I thought it would hurt Bezos, yeah, sure, you know. But
Yeah.
I think in the end, the only people we're going to hurt are the reporters and even the editors who've resigned and are still staying there at some level. And so, the one thing I continue to harp on is that that it in a lot of ways what's happened here is the right, and I'm not assigning this to Bezos, but if you look at Murdoch, if you look at the different, you know, Sinclair and a lot of the other groups out there, they own they own the platforms. Elon owns X, and we rent. I mean, if you're on the pro-democracy side, we buy ads on Fox. We buy
Yeah.
ads during the
We,
baseball games.
yeah. The
We
Lincoln
buy ads
Project, we
on,
do that.
yeah. So they own it and control. And by the way, like on Sinclair, you know, the anchor and the reporters can all be every night saying it on the 6 o'clock news, whether it's an ABC affiliate, NBC affiliate, Fox affiliate, whatever, that the economy sucks, inflation's high, gas prices, Biden's horrible. And we're buying ads on that network, on that broadcast, local broadcast saying, hey, look how great things, or whatever, you know, whatever our answer is. And actually, people trust the anchors and the reporters more than as much as they don't trust the press. They trust them more than they trust the ads. So
Yeah.
they own it. We rent it. And I think that, and I think like when you get to social media and social networks, the destruction of what's happening in terms of the algorithms are constantly feeding the division that Trump and the right are trying to infuse, to hollow out the middle, force people to go to the extremes, and then make a 50-50 choice. And that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah. I just got to put a plug in here and a bit of information. Joe's involved with the starting of a Twitter alternative, for better term of it, called Says Us, SEZ.us. Everybody should sign up on it. It's a great venture. You can post there, and it also will post on Twitter. So it's really a great thing. I mean, nobody's going to save us but ourselves here. And same like with Resolute Square. Everybody should subscribe to Resolute Square.
Mm-hmm.
So, Frank, I got to ask you a question. When you watch these mailboxes, ballot boxes burning, and do you have a secession?
Well, we had this in succession. I
Yes,
mean,
I know.
we
I
and
know. So I was going to blame you, but that's okay.
I know, and uh, uh, yeah, and of course it's not funny. I don't mean to be laughing about it, but as someone who worked on the show texted me as the story broke, uh, in our script we got it right. It happened in Milwaukee, in an actual swing state. This happened weirdly in the Pacific Northwest, which
Yeah,
is not in play. But between Veep and Succession, it seems like everything that's fictional has come true to a fairly well. So I'm sort of inured to it. But one thing we did in Succession, which I feel is very apropos, Jesse Armstrong, who created the show, who's British, said we're not going to resolve our election in Succession, and we didn't. You never find out
yeah,
who won, and we had a right wing populist running, um, uh, who was more like J.D. Vance than Trump, sophisticated, slimy,
right.
an intellectual of some sort. Um, uh, and Jesse, I remember Jesse, who before he was a writer was in British politics as a young man, saying, it's not my job to decide how America's going to work this out. But I was writing him this morning and saying, if you go to, I keep now thinking of the scene in Succession in that same part of the final season where they're waiting for the returns to come in, and the Kieran Culkin character Roman is dodging mobs on Fifth Avenue and police not far from Trump Tower.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, when you were thinking about having that with the ballot box, did some people say, well, no, you're sitting in the writer's room, that's too much, it's never going to happen? Did it seem over the top in
Well,
that moment?
I'll say this much. I don't know if it was quite framed that way, but a lot of care and discussion, debate, and research um, was we spent a lot of time thinking it through. I mean, days, and we there were other scenarios that we considered, and one thing we did was with this one and with others we considered is to make sure it actually could happen. We spoke to people
Right.
who actually were involved with guarding the ballots in Wisconsin, which is where we set our
Where it happened.
incident, and we used I don't know if there'd been a similar incident, but so it's very small compared to what we did, but in the show, but we so we tried to make it accurate. If it did happen, this is how it would play out. This is how it'd be hard to get news about what actually was happening. There'd be conflicting reports. There'd be different government agencies involved in dealing with it. And so we really researched it. Just as with a lot of our election stuff, we brought in people like, for instance, Ben Ginsberg to give us advice and
Who wrote a great piece today for the Times.
yes,
Ben did,
yes.
talking about the various scenarios. Um, I have this very vivid memory of Ben on that election night in 2000 down in
Oh,
Bush headquarters when we thought we'd lost and we thought we'd won. We went out on Congress Street. It was cold. It was raining. Then our pagers, we started pages and started going off saying, come back to headquarters. We're like, what the fuck's going on? And we're all sitting there like 4 a.m, incredibly depressed, except for Ben Ginsberg, who was like a field goal kicker, who was going to be called in to win the Super Bowl. He was like, recount. This is great, And then, we thought we were very clever. He flew to Tallahassee that early morning. And then we got this call from him, this kind of sad call saying, guys, we sent like 3 people with him in a small plane. He says, I'm here, and like a 737 landed with Gore, and they've got like 40 people that just got off the plane. I think we need a bigger boat. Um, but everybody really should read Ben's piece today in the Times. Frank, let me ask you, you've had this fascinating, I think really unique in this perspective, that you were the lead drama critic in the United States, and then you really became, certainly for center left, the lead political columnist. And there's always this debate between politics and culture and how they interact. Now you've gone on to where you're writing stories that prove to be acting out in real time. Um, how do you see that interaction? And has it changed, do you think? I mean, I go back to when
Yeah,
Bill Clinton, got all that grief for Republicans. We thought Bill Clinton was crazy to go in Arsenio Hall and play the sax. And by the end of the race, Bush would have gone to like a country fair and sat in a dunking booth.
right. Look, I remember growing up in Washington. My family was not in politics, but I went to high school with kids whose parents were
Right,
were staffers in the Hill or whatever. Um, so I remember as a child, I remember Kennedy and the excitement of that, and him, and the sort of glamour of him, and a little bit the Kennedy Nixon debates, and saying what is this? I remember Vaughn Meader doing that comment, the First Family. Uh, then uh, it just kept growing and growing. Reagan actually had, as we know, had been in the movies and was
right,
brilliant and his team at staging events. And it's just, and in terms of, going on talk shows or going on The View or whatever, that's a relatively recent development that I guess was ushered in with Clinton to some extent. But everyone, even what didn't George H.W. Bush, out of desperation just before he lost, do an MTV interview.
yes, that,
you know,
yes,
he felt the poor man. I mean, that's not what he should have been. He was not the right temperament for that. But there's some symmetry. There's a symmetry with show business and celebrity, and all of that is stirred together in politics. But also, I think one thing that shaped my view growing up in Washington, and going to the public school system in Washington, and a city that was officially desegregated but was really segregated, was there was an offstage and onstage in politics. There's what you see, what tour buses see when kids go to the Capitol building or the White House,
right,
and then you see it in the case people were living in alleys in poverty in that 2 blocks away, and of course the deals that were going down, what we now call K Street deals, but that whole lobbying, all the stuff that went
right.
on. So there's something intrinsically built into American politics, I think, where people perform one way in public in Washington, and for in a show's ways. They're very good performers like Reagan. They're less good performers like Mitch McConnell, say, but meanwhile, they all sort of know what what goes on behind the scenes counts more. What makes Trump interesting is what you see is what you get. It's not like he's hiding everything horrible. I mean, maybe occasionally he does, but he's not very effective at it, and people leak and tell. But he really, for him, the performance is all. There's nothing. People around him may be hiding stuff and grabbing everything that's not nailed down, but that role is him, and he is playing it in private, I'm sure, as much as in public, which is unlike any of his predecessors. The Jack Kennedy of a legend, and of the Johnny Carson era and all that. It was much different in private. Reagan was different in private, but this guy, he's
I
a
think he's the
clown.
same.
Never. Well, I mean, what?
Yeah. Did you ever deal with him much when you were in New York writing?
No, not really at all. I never
Mhm.
covered.
That's surprising to me. I'm surprised that he didn't try to become your best friend.
Well, he did.
Uh,
It's funny. I found that when I was moving a year and a half ago, I found that he had ripped out an op-ed column of mine, and it's a great column, and signed it in that crazy signature,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and uh, it was a column that was like, I think, about Iraq and attacking Bush, but I don't know. Somehow I can't believe he actually read it. The only time I actually met him was I was at some stupid event in Midtown where there was a Father of the Year prize being handed out by some organization, like 12 random people. And I was one, and he was one.
Oh my God.
Shows how much the honor
God.
was worth. And it was bad weather, and my wife was with me, and he, says, I can give you a ride home. Of course, we were journalists, we had no means to get home. It was like a storm of some sort. And it was with Melania Trump. And so we're in this limousine. We're
I
driven to
love
our
this.
apartment on the Upper West Side, but I don't remember any conversation between it. We can't remember anything. It was completely, anodyne, nothing. But
But
anyway.
you knew that you were in the presence of greatness, and
Oh
the
my
future
God!
first lady. Yes.
I actually never wore that suit again,
Yeah.
and I plan to donate it to the Smithsonian at some point.
Well,
Well, uh,
we have to get Joe's take. Can we put up the latest polling and get Joe's
yeah, I want to hear what's going on.
quick treatise on how he sees the race?
Yeah, well, as most people know who've listened or been on these things, I've always believed that structure of the race was 53-47 from the 46 actually, from the beginning. Um, and I firmly believe that 47% of the American people are for Trump and cannot be moved away from him, but that 53% of the American people decided from the second he came down the escalator that they would never vote for Donald Trump. And so the problem always was he's stuck at 47, 46, somewhere in there. And the question has always been, of that 53, do people stay home? Do they vote third party, or do they vote for the Democrat? And so if you look at those polling numbers that were up there, you'll see, in fact, if you could put them back up full screen, Sam, what you'll see, the most important thing is look at Trump's number in every single one of these polls. 47, 47, 47, 47, 48, 47. You keep going down. They're all, again, the structure of the race. So many of these, by the way, are like Emerson. A lot of these skew more Republican in their sample size, in how they sample it. In fact, most of those that have a dead heat are lean in terms of past. They've always been sort of overstated the Republican number. But if you look at that, then you look at where comma is, you're going to see a lot more 50s and 51s, and so what I'm saying is I believe that structure of the race is still in the structure of the race. I think if Biden had been the nominee, a lot more people in that 53 group would be staying home or voting third party, fair or not. That's what I think would have happened, made it a closer race. But I think what we're seeing is this thing's about to expand to the 46, 53-ish kind of structure that I think's been there all along. And I don't think Madison Square Garden did anything but help that move to happen. But we'll see.
Frank, we were talking earlier, Joe and I, about you have polls which have samples of hundreds or maybe a couple of thousand most. We now have almost 50 million people that voted, that's a big sample,
Mm-hmm.
And what really is striking is you have women voting at 10% higher than men. So
Is that more than usual?
the norm is 4.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, go on.
Since 2004, 4%. Now, this will probably, as we say in Vermont, sugar out and narrow. So, I don't think you're going to wake up 2 weeks from now and you're going to have women voted at 10% higher than men. I mean, if we do, Harris is going to win like Reagan.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to intensity of, again, this post-Dobbs world. And, if you go back to 22, there was a great prediction of a red wave. And Joe Trippi and Simon Rosenberg, and if everybody doesn't follow Simon Rosenberg, you really should. His Hopium Substack. They were out there, pretty lone wolves saying there wasn't going to be a red wave. and it proved to be the
Well,
case.
they're doing the same thing now. I mean,
Yeah.
basically in October of 2022, they started flooding the Republican pollsters who do most of their polling for Senate races and governor's races and House races on the Republican side were startingly jumping and dumping quote independent polls into the all through October of 2022 that all showed a big red wave coming, and the aggregators all at 538 and everybody averaged them in with everything with the real true independent polls that were out there, and that showed the Republic made it. They flooded it with so many polls that it looked like the big red wave was coming.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing now, but there's two things that I would point out. First of all, the CES survey, I think it came out yesterday. This is one. It's not a 5,000. It's not a 1,000 person sample. It's not a 1,000 person sample. It's something like 60,000
70,000.
interviews. 70,000 interviews. It has the rate. So 70,000 people got interviewed. That has the race at 51 Harris, 47 Trump, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's right.
But so, which again, if you go back to my 53-46 kind of frame of the race, we're getting in there. Does her ground game up that a little bit closer to what I'm thinking? But that's one of the things that's going on. And the other thing that I'm seeing is I think there are ticket splitters this year, but none of them are on the pro-democracy or the Democratic side. I mean, you won't find many people who are voting for Kamala Harris and let's say voting for Larry Hogan in Maryland, even though that would make you could sort of see that it's not happening. They don't want to give the Senate over. On the Republican side, I think there are a lot of Haley voters, and I was saying this earlier, where I think some of them are going to vote for Kamala Harris. But then what seems to be going on is they immediately flip and make sure that they vote for the Republican for Senate and House. And so she's going to benefit from that. There's another group of those voters, rhinos, Haley voters, whatever you think, who in the end cannot bring themselves to vote for a Democrat for president of the United States. But what you're seeing is they're not going to give Trump, that group is not going to give Trump a blank check. They are going to vote for a Democrat for the Senate and the House. And so that's why I think you're seeing in places like Ohio, Sherrod Brown both be ahead in the Senate race, but Trump be 7 points ahead in the presidential race. The only way that can be happening there, Arizona with Gallegos, is if a lot of those Trump voters are, there's a split vote going on, split ticket thing going on, but it's almost all on the Republican side. And I think it's going to benefit a lot of our House members, races in the battlegrounds, and may even help someone like Tester in Montana. But we'll see. But that's sort of how I see that. When I'm looking at the numbers, when I'm looking underneath the hood, that's what I'm seeing.
Can I ask a question? Oh,
yeah, go for it.
You guys know more about this than I do. As the cliche has become, no matter what Trump does, it doesn't seem to move the needle, from the Access Hollywood tape to whatever he does. So when we take some hope in Pennsylvania in terms of his remarks that insulted 500,000 Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania, is that a false hope or something like that?
No, it's not a false hope. And see, I would argue that what Trump has said before has had an impact, which is why he can't get over 47%. It is limited. Remember, this guy won one race in his life with 46.1%.
Mm-hmm.
Romney lost with 47.2%. And then Trump lost with 46.9%. So here you have a guy who can't get over 47%. And I think that's one of the reasons, because it's just this sort of weight that he has, which if you look at his favorable, unfavorable ratio, it's always been to the bad. And that's one of the differences in this. When it was him and Hillary Clinton, they both had bad fave, unfave. But Harris's favorable to unfavorable ratio is about 10 points higher than Trump's. So why is that important? When you really look at these voters, that so-called undecided voters, they tend to break almost perfectly based upon favorable, unfavorable, which makes sense when you think about it. Who's going to get up in the morning and go vote for somebody they have an unfavorable view of? You're either not going to vote, or if you do vote, you're going to leave them off the ticket, probably. Just not. I don't know. I'm not going to vote for somebody I really don't like that much. So there was an interesting Emerson poll that showed that people who had decided in the last 3 weeks or something, were overwhelmingly going Harris's way. So, I think that if you were one theory of the race, which I'm with Joe completely on this. If you were for Trump, you had all the reasons to be for Trump last June, July, August. Maybe he got a little bump with the attempted assassination, but that came back down. You're looking for somebody else if you haven't been for Trump, because Trump is there. If you want to go there, you go there. And I think that, the goal of the Harris campaign is to coalesce at 53%. And I think they understand that. And, in a world in which you have Liz Cheney and Bernie Sanders on the same side.
Talk about seeing pigs fly. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that the Trump campaign sees any trouble ahead for themselves? Are they just completely enthralled to their own bullshit, basically? And there's
I think everything they're doing is to prepare for the after. To prepare to go down at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, declare that he's won, regardless of what any of the numbers are, and fight from November 5th to January 20th to upset, to create a cloud of confusion, and game out every obstacle they could throw to Harris being sworn in on the 20th. I believe a lot of the front running of the polls that they're doing to create that red wave thing, the betting markets, where suddenly millions of dollars are being, like, from 5 accounts to get the Trump vote in the betting markets way up, is all about creating the smoke screen that, look at the polls, look at the betting markets, I'm ahead. Oh, look at the early vote here. The early count of votes at 9 or 10 o'clock, I'm ahead everywhere. I won, and overnight they're going to steal it from us. So stay vigilant. Be ready to fight tomorrow, because overnight they're going to start stealing it. These horrible, and it's all geared towards this fundamental assault that they're making. I'm not saying that they think they've lost yet. That's not my point. But I think it's like it's the win-win. If they win, they win, and if they don't, they're going to win. They're going to continue the fight, and they know we'll keep the democracy going for them. We'll litigate it in the courts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and they will that's their intent, is to wear us down. And if they can't defeat us on November 5th, they'll defeat us in 2028. That's I think the mindset that we don't completely understand as proponents of democracy, that we're actually assisting them in their heads.
I get it. It's a very sobering point. Are we to believe? I assume we are. Reports in real news organizations, the Democrats, the Democratic Party, and the campaign are really suiting up a lot of Ben Ginsburgs and others to
Mark Elias
fight on the beaches.
I think the Harris campaign is
I think Stuart, you're going to mute, I think.
Am I mute
I heard
now?
you.
Oh, I did. I don't know.
I'm
sorry. I can't.
Okay. This is what happens when you start talking about Trump. They intervene. But I think that the Harris campaign has run a really extraordinary campaign, and they have tremendous resources. And I think that they are going to be.
I'm now not hearing at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I can hear you, but I don't. Other people definitely are not hearing.
Frank, we're going to get you back.
Joe, can you recap?
Listen.
Oh, now I hear you.
Now you got it. We're just saying, I think that they've run a great campaign. I think that what is happening right now, and we should probably wind this up to let people go watch the thing. But
Yes.
Lips.
you know, I've sat in these rooms trying to decide what year you should go in a presidential race, and it gets so repetitive. I don't know who thought of the idea of doing this on the ellipse, but it's just such a smart idea.
It
You
is.
know,
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
it's like I go buy that person a drink, you know, because the really a first round draft pick kind of move.
It's brilliant. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll wind it up there so everybody can go watch.
Thank you for having me on. I so enjoyed
Frank,
it.
it's
Yeah.
such a treat. It's such
Really
a
a treat for
It's
me.
great
And
being
thanks,
with you, Frank. Thanks for coming.
thanks for being so generous to me. It was great to be with both of you.
you know.
Thank
And
you.
let me say again, if you haven't read Frank's memoir, Ghostlight, it is really extraordinary. And go out and read it. It's a good break from talking about politics and takes us into another world.
Thank
Joe,
you.
no, really, Frank, it's a beautiful book. Joe, thanks. Everybody should listen to the Trippi show, which is terrific, and follow Rick Wilson's Substack and his Enemies List podcast and the Lincoln Project podcast. And tomorrow night we have a Resolute Square show with the fabulous Maya May, Punching Up, in which it's going to be an all-comedian show. Which I think is really such a great idea also, because at this moment where a comedian is playing such a large role in what is happening. I mean, you might have a comedian who determined the outcome of the presidential race.
He might be available for tomorrow night, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
I
I
don't think he's
imagine.
getting a lot of books.
You know, he's not in the witness protection program. So thank you all, and we'll see you
Thank
next
you.
Tuesday night, and vote often and early.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everybody.
much.
Thanks, Frank. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you.